to be story told off. First up, we've been missing her for a little while and we're so pumped that she's back with us. Always a hit. Come on up, Anne. Yeah.
I have a few vignettes to tell, so there'll be a few different things. Is that picking up? Okay. First, my husband Ross and I were living in Williamstown. One evening I was watching TV while he was working an evening shift. I suddenly noticed my cat Axel staring at a spot behind a recliner chair, which was off to my right. I thought, what is she looking at? Because she looked very alarmed with wide eyes. I thought there must be a moth or a spider or something. Then suddenly a dark gray cat took a few steps out from behind the chair, but stopped when it saw me and quickly retreated. I thought, okay, I don't have a dark gray cat, but it was evening. We did have another cat, and she'd been last seen curled up on the bed in the next room. So I got up and walked over to the chair. There was no cat behind it. I looked around, I looked underneath it, I even felt up into the chair. There was no cat there. Axel still had a very wide-eyed expression on her face. And I went into the bedroom, and there was my other cat curled up exactly as she had been 15 minutes earlier, sound asleep. I could only deduce that Axel and I had seen a cat ghost. Number two, the aforementioned Ross, my husband, as some of you know, is a nurse, and he was working one night in the intensive care unit at the Northern Hospital. He was in charge, so he was walking from one unit, cardiac, to the other, intensive care, and as he went around the back way, he heard a voice calling him, Ross, Ross. He turned and looked back up the darkened hallway where the voice seemed to have come from. He said it sounded like an elderly woman's voice, but it was very clear as a bell, he said. But there was no one there, and the area was where the doctor's offices were, and they were all locked up for the night. Just then another nurse who was walking towards him said, I just heard someone calling you. And she said the voice seemed to her to have come from that darkened area too. Now Ross is very much not the type to believe in ghosts, but he is convinced that it must have been the ghost of a patient he had once tended, who had subsequently died. Now, on to spirits. What's the difference between ghosts and spirits? I'm not sure, but my experience tells me that while ghosts can actually be seen or heard, spirits make you feel their presence. And it's a very, very strong and sure feeling. The 4th of September, 2006. It's the day we were moving from the house in Williamstown to the house we had bought in Footscray. It was also the day Steve Irwin died. I was driving back and forth from one house to another, ferrying the smaller and fragile items while Ross helped the guys with the van. I heard the news about Steve Irwin on the radio as I drove, and I was of course shocked, as most people were. But not as shocked as I was a few minutes later when I suddenly felt a very intense sense of him. I felt that he was in the car in my head, and that he was trying frantically to communicate something to me. Now this was especially odd because I wasn't particularly a fan of his. I knew who he was, of course, but I'd never seen his TV show and hadn't at that point been to the Australia Zoo. But there this powerful presence was with me. He seemed to be wanting me to get the message that he was okay. That although he had not wanted to die, he was okay and would be there somehow with and for his family. I also had a strong feeling that I was not the only one he was reaching out to. This sense was very strong and weird, and it stayed with me for a few hours that day. In fact, it continued on and off for a few days. I even thought of somehow trying to contact his wife, Terry, emailing her or something, although of course I knew I would sound like a crackpot. I didn't do that, but I was in fact relieved when I watched his funeral on TV, and his daughter Bindi said something to the effect that she knew her dad was still there with her, and she was comforted by his presence. She said it in a way that made me feel that she had gotten that message too. and that maybe his spirit had been sensing anyone who was receptive, which I hadn't known I was until that point, and had gone quickly to anyone who might hear him. Next. I was employed a while back at a place that had a small B&B attached, and one of my duties was assisting my colleagues in taking reservations, managing check-ins and check-outs, and keeping the kitchen stocked. One afternoon, a woman who was checking out, and I hope she's not here tonight, told us she'd had a very bad experience overnight and she wanted to let us know. She said she'd partially woken up in the night feeling that a man was sitting on her chest and trying to strangle her, and that he really wanted to kill her. He was full of very violent and hateful intent. She knew she wasn't quite fully awake, so she struggled through to consciousness with this continued feeling, finally managed to get up and turn on the light, and there was nobody there, and her door was still locked. But she said she was very sure that he had been there. Of course, we were skeptical and wondered if she might consider that it had been a very, very vivid nightmare. We also knew that pressure on the chest can be a heart attack symptom, and we asked her gently about that. No, she was very adamant. It had been real. Later that day, the kitchen needed restocking, so I decided to go over with my colleagues to see which room the guest had been in. It was an upstairs room, and I'd never been up there. As one colleague and I walked up the stairs, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I got chills. Also, straight ahead of us, and at the top of the stairs just outside the room, was a portrait of a man, probably from 100 years ago. His expression seemed malevolent, glaring. My colleagues also felt something unpleasant, and we hurried right back out of there. We came up with the idea to ask one of the religious professionals we knew if they could do something, an exorcism perhaps? We found someone, a reverend, who didn't laugh at us and agreed to come over and have a look at the area where the room was. We went with her and up the stairs again. She mentioned that she too felt something as we went up, and it got stronger when she went into the room in question. She said she got the sense that someone had been hurt very badly in that room a long time ago, physically and psychologically very violently hurt. She therefore proposed that she would pray in the room, talk to the spirit, acknowledge his pain, and ask forgiveness for whatever had been done to him, and encourage him to be at peace. She spent quite a bit of time doing this, and as she finished, we could immediately feel it. Suddenly, the level of sense of the room diminished. Not only that, the expression of the man in the portrait seemed more neutral. I can't say it worked 100% though, because one late afternoon I had to go over to the house by myself to drop something off. No one was staying there that night, but I had to go in the front door and just put a tablecloth that was to be laundered over by the staircase. I wasn't keen to do this, but it had to be done and everyone else had already gone home for the day. So I ran in quickly, dropped the tablecloth at the spot where it should be, and turned to leave. But the front door would not open. This was impossible. You could not lock yourself in. I turned the knob, I turned the lock. Every way I could, I pulled, I twisted, nothing. Okay, now I was scared. I felt like someone was trying to trap me in there. I made a quick decision to give up on the front door and get to the back door as quickly as I could. It opened. I ran quickly out and just hoped that my key would now open the back door to my building. Thank goodness it got me in, and as I walked into my own work area, I was shaking like a leaf. The next day when I told my colleagues what had happened, they said, "You can't lock yourself in." Maybe true, but maybe someone else could. I never did go back to that building ever again.